Good Yontef. A few announcements. Immediately following the service, because it is such a beautiful Yom Tov day, we're going to go out through the main doors and have lunch waiting for us on the Bathurst Street Plaza. Those who would benefit from a ramp, you can just come through the Herman Chapel here, and that will take you also to the same plaza. And our ushers are here to assist. This Sunday evening, there is a special program in partnership with the Race Relations of Canada and the CJN. It is a conversation to hear stories of Jewish Indigenous Canadians. And those are very important stories for us to hear, and they are not as uncommon as you might think. I'd also like to call attention to a 3-part series, Shabbat Morning Torah Study, with me beginning tomorrow, from 9 to 10, 3 weeks in a row, called Soul Cycle, where we're going to be looking at aspects and ideas about the Jewish soul. So let's begin where we left off with Ruth, the young Moabite widow, who tells Naomi, her Israelite mother-in-law, "Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. This and more may the Eternal One do for me, if anything but death should separate you from me." The very definition of chesed, of loving loyalty. I always heard these words as Ruth, the younger of the two, trying to bring comfort to Naomi, who renamed herself Mara, bitterness. After all, Naomi has buried her own husband and 2 sons. But perhaps these words of chesed are not so much Ruth's way to comfort Naomi, but rather an attempt to comfort herself. Because Ruth is inexperienced. She needs a partner to pull her up from her grief. And she sees Naomi's wisdom of years and the confidence in her stride as she journeys on with dignity and strength. And so it could be that Ruth begs her not to turn her away for her sake. Not for Naomi the elder, but for Ruth the younger. And there's a hint of this possibility that Ruth's famous words, "Entreat me not to leave you," are for her own best comfort rather than an attempt to support and comfort Naomi. In the very next verse, there it is written, "When Naomi saw how determined Ruth was to go with her, she stopped arguing with her, and the 2 of them walked on together." As if Naomi was taking Rahmanis on Ruth. A few years ago, a Trontonian named Joy Tyndall shared with the Globe and Mail her reflections on grieving. The article is entitled, "Learning to be a Widow is the Hardest Thing I Have Ever Done." She writes, "I lost my husband on November 29th, 2011, a statement that implies that I nearly misplaced him in an absent-minded fit. And if I could just remember where I left him, then all would be well again. The euphemism, 'I lost my husband,' sounds better than the truth. Sometimes there are no patterns," she says. "Loss struck me as the graph of a bad tech stock, where today's all-time low is a mere prelude to tomorrow's new rock bottom. Then perhaps 18 months on, bereavement was more like learning to walk again, minus childhood's tottering charm. The flexibility of time destabilizes me," she says, a young widow. "Sometimes, it seems, he disappeared decades ago, and moments later I imagine that he just stepped out of the room. Along with time, the magnitude of loss shifts from bottomless pit to manageable sorrow, further disorienting me. Am I going mad? Has anyone ever felt this way? In my mid-50s, I'm like a confused teenager all over again. Who am I? What should I do? I'm a stranger to myself. Small things overwhelm me. Life without Michael is both too much and too little. This is why we come for Yizkor, to draw life wisdom from our age-old tradition as Ruth sought to draw insight and know-how from Naomi. Look around this sanctuary. There are stories of life wisdom among us. Just being in the presence of fellow mourners, not even knowing one another's stories of loss and love, it is still enough to receive some newfound measure of strength and comfort, and that is in part why we have come. Tyndall continues, "This is what I now understand. Some emotional landmines we can brace for, such as a wedding anniversary, or the date of his diagnosis or death, the first holiday without him. But most landmines are unexpected. A few bars of music, a mental snapshot, a handwritten note. You cannot protect yourself from these, and they are everywhere." This also points to the brilliance of our Yizkor tradition, to help us mark the passage of time, deliberately to anchor us when grief sends us reeling. When death comes to those we love, yes, time does play tricks on us. The 4 Yizkor days of the year, the last day of Pesach, Yom Kippur afternoon, Shmini Atzeret in the fall, and today's Shavuot, these 4 days are anchors that root us in the calendar of holy days when we often miss our loved ones acutely. And one final excerpt from Tyndall's meditation on grief. "I need to come to terms with the fact that nothing will ever be right again, for his death was a death of us too. And when he died, we died too. I'm left sifting through the rubble with only my half of the memories. The only other person in the world who shared those remembrances has gone. I fear that without his reinforcement of my memories, I will gradually lose even my half of the tale of us. And as our life together equaled most of my adult life, I may in time forget much of my own personal history. Worse, I worry that over time he will slip away from memory completely." And this is why we say Kaddish. Because God also remembers. We are not solely responsible for all the remembering to be done. Yizkor means God who remembers. The God of all time and space remembers everything and everyone and every moment so that we don't have to bear the burden of memory alone. We can say Kaddish to console God who is the creator and who has witnessed the light go out in one of God's remarkable creations. God is like Naomi in a way, the mother who brought children into the world and is now embittered by loss, now that they have gone from life. And so we comfort God as Ruth comforted Naomi. But this time with words of Kaddish, Yitgadal v'yitkadash, magnified and sanctified is your great name, O God. Like Ruth attempting to comfort Naomi with promises of loving loyalty, so do we offer up our best words of comfort to God who is bereaved and bereft. Again and again and again, with every burial, Yitgadal v'yitkadash, magnified and sanctified is your great name. In recent weeks, one of the Gdolei Hador, one of the greats of our generation, has died. Rabbi Harold Kushner. He was my father's friend and study partner. Boston area rabbis met for decades every Monday morning to study Torah and Midrash. They made each other better rabbis. Rabbi Kushner is most well known by his bestseller, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. He wrote it when theology became personal. He studied with my father at Columbia, and then he went on to the Jewish Theological Seminary, where he studied in both places philosophy and theology, and it all came crashing down when his young son was born with a very rare and fatal disease. He writes this. I want to share some of his words today so that we can benefit from his wisdom again, we who mourn. He could be saying these words to Ruth. He could be saying these words to Naomi. He is saying these words to each and every one of us who mourns. God does not cause our misfortunes. Some are caused by bad luck. Some are caused by bad people. And some are simply an inevitable consequence of our being human and being mortal, living in a world of inflexible natural laws. Laws of nature do not make exceptions for nice people. A bullet has no conscience, neither does a malignant tumor or an automobile gone out of control. And that is why good people get sick and get hurt as much as anyone. But the tragedy is not God's will, the rabbi insists. We need not feel hurt or betrayed by God when tragedy strikes. We can turn to God and help in overcoming it precisely because we can tell ourselves that God is as outraged by it as we are. Pain is the price we pay for being alive. Dead cells in our hair and our fingernails cannot feel pain. They cannot feel anything, but we are alive. And part of the human condition is to experience pain. Rabbi Kushner continues, we don't have to beg or bribe God to give us strength and hope or patience. We need only to turn to God and admit that we cannot do this alone. That we understand that bravely bearing up under illness is one of the most human, one of the most godly things we can ever do. Why this custom of Yizkor? Why do we come to pray when our hearts are broken all over again? Rabbi Kushner instructs us, one of the things that constantly reassures me that God is real and not just an idea that religious leaders made up, is the fact that people who pray for strength and hope and courage so often find resources of strength and hope and courage that they did not have before they prayed. Is there an answer to the question of why bad things happen to good people? And keep in mind, the title of his book was not why, but when, implying bad things do happen to good people, bad things will happen to good people. So what do we do then? What do we do when it strikes? But here he comes to the question that we ask most often, why? And Rabbi Kushner, Zichrono Livracha, says that the response can be that we should forgive the world for not being perfect, that we should forgive God for not making a better world, that we should reach out to the people around us and should go on living despite it all, no longer asking why something bad happened, but asking instead how we will respond when indeed it does. People who pray for miracles usually do not get miracles, but people who pray for courage and strength to bear the unbearable, for the grace to remember that what they have left instead of what they have lost, very often find their prayers answered. Their prayers help them to tap hidden reserves of faith and courage that were not available to them before. That is the power of prayer. That is one of the finest responses when bad things happen to good people. So may it be for us that we can tap into those hidden reserves of faith and courage through our collective prayers in this sanctuary at this sacred hour of Yizkor. Page 340.